At the desk with me now to discuss some of the key issues facing investment managers for the year ahead is Ian Bessarabia, Business Development Manager for Sub-Saharan Africa at Swift. Good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Gugu. It's good to be here.
Fantastic. Let's get into this survey that you actually did and maybe get an understanding of who you actually spoke to, how
Sure.
big these investment managers are, and the progress you've seen in the survey from years before.
Okay, so we commissioned a survey during the third quarter of last year, and we surveyed 6 out of the 10 top investment managers around the world, as well as 30 of their counterparts in the investment management industry. And the real objective of the survey was to really go out and identify what are the operational challenges that investment managers are going to be facing in 2015 and ahead. And it was quite interesting to see what the top the top issues on their agenda was, and that was really focused on regulation, automation and financial compliance. So very much trends that we've seen in the banking and financial industry have now started to come out as big issues or big challenges that the investment management community are facing.
For the layman and myself, unpack this for us.
Yes.
Why are these viewed as challenges from a regulatory perspective? Let's start on that one firstly.
Well, I think if we look at the post-crisis, there's been a lot of regulation that's been drawn up, and investment managers, specifically from an operational side, are being put under a lot of pressure to actually report in different formats to different regulatory bodies. So the pressure on investment managers to comply with this regulation is becoming cumbersome. It's also becoming very costly, and it's prejudicing or it's precluding the investment managers from actually focusing on their jobs at hand, and that's to service their clients and service their markets. So one of the big areas where they're looking at is to say, well, is there areas for collaboration? Is there areas to focus on doing this together instead of each person having to make these investments into regulatory reporting, etc.?
Just on that regulation, are we finding that it's working more in favor of the consumer or the client versus the financial institution itself?
Well, I think the trend from the investment managers is they're not really seeing much value in terms of actually getting the regulatory reporting out. They understand that it's a requirement that they need to comply with, but there's no real benefit, direct benefit that they're seeing from that. And that's where Swift is looking to work, as Swift being an industry-owned cooperative, are looking to work with the industry, and that was one of the reasons why we put together this research paper. We commissioned the survey to identify areas where we could collaborate and where we could make the regulatory burden a lot easier for the investment management community, specifically from an operational perspective, to comply.
Tell us about some of the other challenges. I understand you were looking to mitigate outsourcing risk as well as automation, which you mentioned a moment ago.
So I think one of the key aspects is around automation, and as we look at markets today, markets are becoming a lot more technologically advanced, and especially if we look, this is not just in big global markets, we look at Africa as well, and Africa, I think, is a clear indicator where the markets are really looking to focus on how they can improve their market access, and the old days, if I can say, or the historical way of pushing paper and manual processes is a hindrance to becoming operationally efficient. So one of the other areas where investment managers in the survey highlighted automation, and specifically the need for standardization. Standardization is something that is critical, is that if you have a standardized process, it makes it a lot easier to process more efficiently, reduce your operational risk, and the standardization can be reused in different markets. So for example, something that's very specific or relevant to the African markets is regionalization. So we have a lot of regionalization initiatives. Specifically, we look at SADC as an example, where different markets are looking to collaborate and work together to make their markets more accessible. By utilizing standardized processes and high levels of automation, that makes the investor experience that much more confident. They're a lot more confident, and it reduces the amount of risk. And I think it takes a lot of cost out of the investment manager's operations back office, not having to manage all these manual processes.
You've touched on cost, which is something that I wanted us to venture into, because if the investment community is looking to find solutions here, will it see a significant reduction in some of the overheads that they experience within the companies?
Well, there's certainly two aspects to look at it from that perspective. The one is clearly through collaboration. You know, if we look at many of the topics that were identified or highlighted in the paper, a lot of them are not in a competitive space. They're actually very much there as a necessity to make markets more efficient. So the need need for each individual participant to go and spend their own money on developing these standards or proprietary standards, or to develop their own regulatory reporting processes and that is not very cost effective. So by collaborating, and that's where we are looking at working with the various industries and working through different bodies. So for example, in South Africa, we work through a CISA. In other areas in markets in sub-Saharan Africa, we work with other associations, the associations of custodians, etc., to really look at areas where there's a need to collaborate, where we can reduce costs by sharing some of the knowledge, some of the IP, and finding ways to reduce costs.
So it's a collaborative effort to find solutions to this problem. I want to touch on other solutions that you hopefully are finding to some of the challenges that have been mentioned here. From a regulatory perspective, are you liaising with government and the regulators in the industry to hopefully cut down on the excessive red tape?
Yeah, so certainly from our side, we as I say, we collaborate with all market participants, and we're very open to being that catalyst to try and bring the various market players together. It's sometimes not easy to bring competitors around the table, but often we find a middle ground and we find an opportunity. So yes, we certainly are engaging with regulators, and it's not our role from a SWIFT perspective to regulate, but we're there to support the industry and to take that burden and make it less cumbersome for the industry to be able to comply with regulation.
Ian, thank you so much for your time today. Much appreciated, giving us some insights. Hopefully this doesn't impact on the investor.
No, it certainly should benefit the investor and make it easier for the investor to invest in different markets and have that same investor experience across all the markets they're investing in.
Fantastic. That's what we want to hear.
Indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was Ian Bessarabia, who's a business development manager for sub-Saharan Africa at SWIFT.